Good evening, everyone. We'll get started here shortly. It's not quite 5:30. Thanks for joining us tonight. You'll see here the welcome slide, some things about what we'll be doing tonight. So I'll let you get acquainted and familiar with what it is we're doing this evening on this slide, and we'll get started here shortly. Good evening, everyone. We'll get started here shortly. We're just a little bit after 5:30. We'll give people a few more minutes to log in and get with us here this evening, and we'll get started with tonight's presentation and discussion. In the meantime, we'll let you get acquainted with the information that's on the screen at the moment, and we'll get started here in a few moments. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started this evening. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your time today. This is the first of two community roundtables that we're holding here this evening and tomorrow morning with the community of Bluffton. And we're excited to be having these meetings and these discussions with you all as we go through the meeting this evening. Using the Zoom webinar, we will be using the Q&A function to interact with all of you. So please use the Q&A box to ask any questions throughout the presentation this evening. At the end of tonight's presentation, we will allow individuals who want to ask a live question to raise their hand, and we'll allow you to unmute, and we'll let you ask your question. And we'll have some conversation. We'll also be asking a couple interactive questions via Zoom here this evening as well. So we will use that function tonight too. And then at the end of the meeting, you can visit the Blueprint Bluffton website as part of the town's website to view a PDF of this presentation and a recording of one of the meetings. And we'll put that website up again at the end. And we'll have a short survey as well that folks can answer. So there's a way to interact with this after this evening. And we're excited to be with you all here digitally tonight, but hopefully here the next time we get together, we will be able to do so in person. I think we're nearing that. So thank you for joining us for the first community roundtable. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose of tonight's meeting. We'll be going through some planning context, a little bit of community engagement information that we've gained so far. We'll discuss existing conditions, and then we will leave time for discussion before talking about next steps for this work. So we'll be doing a short presentation here. If you have any questions or comments throughout tonight's presentation, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box. No question. We aim to not let any questions go unanswered. If they're easy to answer, some folks from our team who are with me tonight, Chris Herman, who we'll hear speak in a moment, Sarah Lilly, that are also here with us, as well as Kevin Eichard, Charlotte Moore, and Darby McLean from the town of Bluffton are also here and able to answer questions both live and written. So if you have a question, use that. We'll do our best to answer it throughout the presentation or at the end of the presentation. And then, as I said, we'll allow folks to raise their hand and ask questions at the end of the meeting tonight, and we'll have some live Q&A. So the purpose of this evening's meeting is to talk about the comprehensive plan effort and give an overview of that process. And we want to review some of the initial input we've received so far, but also get some input from you all this evening. So we'll be doing a project overview. We'll be talking about initial existing conditions work that we've done. But really, I think the last point is the most salient, which is we want to understand community priorities. And we're beginning to form that understanding, but tonight plays a key role in that, as well as the survey that we'll have up on the website following tonight's meeting. It really is the purpose of this part of the process. We'll come back to the community, and like I said, hopefully this is in person, to do a community visioning workshop. So we'll have all of the community input we've received to that point, as well as analysis that has been conducted to review with you all. And we'll have some plans and objectives that we want to review and have a chance to check in with the community on. So that's the second meeting, probably late summer, early fall would be when that occurs. And then there'll be a third opportunity as we create a draft plan document to do an open house, probably latter part of this year or early part of next. So that's sort of the arc of the work and the purpose of the three touch points that we'll have with the community through this process. So tonight really is just the beginning of that. So that we better understand who's here with us this evening, we have a quick poll that we'd like to take here inside of Zoom. So please describe yourself, whether you're a resident of Bluffton, or you work in Bluffton, or own a business in Bluffton, or you'd like to live in Bluffton but don't today. If you could go ahead and answer this question, we'd love to get a sense of who's with us here this evening. Thank you. Great. So it looks like we have a fair amount of residents, property owners, a couple of folks that work in Bluffton, a couple that own a business, and a couple of visitors. So a good mix of folks with us here this evening. Thanks for answering that question. Gives us a good sense of who's with us tonight. Okay, we'll dive right in here and talk a little bit about planning context. I'll hand it over to Chris.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We wanted to start by reviewing both the vision and mission of the town of Bluffton. Now, this is the existing vision for the town, and this is really what we want to build on in this comprehensive plan, building on this vision. So you can see that we're talking about planning together for a greater future. And that's really what comprehensive planning is all about, is looking at where we are today and talking about where do we want to go tomorrow and how do we get there. So you can see, again, part of the low country and the importance of past, present, and looking to the future. And then for the mission, again, taking care of the citizens, the town, and each other, and by making the community better. And again, that's what comprehensive planning, that's the purpose. And that's really what we want to hear from you tonight, is your ideas on what's working and what is great and what things we should be focusing on improving as part of this comprehensive plan to make your lives and make the community better as we move forward. And we'll be talking a little bit more detail about that. So why plan? It's really important for us to all understand what a comprehensive plan is and why we do this. So the purpose and the horizon, we're really looking at what is the vision for our community over the next 10 years, particularly. So what are the steps we're going to take? What things should we focus on looking 10 years out and obviously beyond? And we want to support the town's vision. We just showed you that. And so that includes continuing to preserve and build upon our significant historic heritage. How do we continue to have great neighborhoods, livable communities, and maintain our active and healthy lifestyle? We also want to balance protecting our unique natural features, natural and environmental features, our historic features, but also understand that we have to balance that with development and growth and all the services and amenities that we come to expect as a community. And a fundamental part of comprehensive planning is community engagement. This is your plan. This represents what you want to see for the town of Bluffton. So we are going to, this is the start. We are going to have many opportunities to engage you, engage a community. We're going to talk more about that here as part of this presentation. But it's really important that we hear from you because your input is what's going to guide this plan. And what comes out of this is going to be a highly visual plan. It's going to communicate clearly what we heard from you, how we help the town of Bluffton achieve the goals that come out of this effort, and also hopefully quickly and easily convey these ideas to everyone, both the public and property owners and businesses and the communities, those interested in investing in Bluffton. Another piece to this is planning. A comprehensive plan is actually required by South Carolina state law. So every 10 years, they require communities to keep their plans updated and current. So it helps guide, again, the public investment and preserves community trust, public trust. There are now 10 required plan elements. These are standard components of comprehensive plans. So talking about the population and the demographics, trends, who we are as a people, what things are changing, what do we need to address as the demographics of our community change. Economic development, always important, that we're providing job and employment opportunities, that we're providing a foundation and a tax base for the community. Natural resources and cultural resources, we want to preserve the heritage and history of Bluffton, We want to make sure that we're addressing natural resources in the environment and protecting those that we deem as important. Community facilities, the things that serve all of us, the needs that we all have, making sure that they're adequate, and that includes safety and health and welfare. And then, Andrew, if you go back to that, yep. Housing and land use. So housing continues to be an important point for people we've talked to so far, housing in Bluffton, and talking about that. Land use is a fundamental component of a comprehensive plan. So talking about what land uses there are today, you're going to see some of that. And what land uses, do we want to change anything? Are there things we should be anticipating going into the future? Transportation network, both vehicular roadways, but as well as complete streets. So that means multi-use paths, that means sidewalks, and that means things like transit and how we accommodate that. A new category added by the state was resilience. Again, how do we be resilient communities that if unexpected events happen, or maybe even potential expected events, that we are resilient and can withstand those. And then at the end, a priority investment. So after we look at all this, deciding as a community where we want to spend our energies and investments and time moving forward, where the priority action items that come out of this plan. Beyond just the state requirements, the town of Bluffton has asked us to look at 7 strategic areas. Affordable workforce housing, identified as very important. Again, always worried about community quality of life and improving that. Looking at economic growth, looking at fiscal sustainability. So how do we balance the land uses and development that occurs with the fiscal requirements of servicing and providing the services for all of those land uses, the people and community of Bluffton. Infrastructure, the May River and surrounding rivers and watersheds are very important. And then just the organizational composition of the town. So those are the 7 additional strategic focus areas. Again, why we do this? This is really designed to guide public decision-making, your elected officials, so they can hear what's important for you, the community, what your vision is, and they can react to that. And that also directly goes into things like capital expenditure. So where does the town invest their funds? What are the priority things to put money into? And work with other communities or other agencies to provide resources to achieve. It's also critically important because this plan lays out a roadmap for preserving and developing in the future so that private property owners, so developers understand what the community's expectations are, what the town is going to be looking for in any new proposals. So it's really important. So again, here's some examples of some of the capital projects. And then it's really important that a comprehensive plan builds on all the great work that you as a community has accomplished across time. A number of these is just a sampling of plans that we're looking at. A number of you participated in these plans and helped craft them. Some of these things have been completed, which is great. Some of these things are still outstanding things that we want to achieve as a community, and we want to make sure we capture those and carry those forward as part of the plan, part of the comprehensive plan. We will say in our conversations that at the top of that list, the 2000 State of Mind effort in Charette really seems to be a foundational event for the community. And we hear people bring up the state of mind as a critical feature for Bluffton. And so I'd love to hear more about that today, but we know that that's a critical piece that we want to carry forward and talk about how does that look moving forward from here? How does that state of mind, the Bluffton state of mind, apply as we move into this 21st century? All right, Andrew.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Yep.
I want to review community engagement and some early results that we've gotten. Some of you may have already answered the first survey questions that we put up on the Town of Bluffton's website. And if you did, thank you for doing that. But if you didn't, here are the questions that we asked. So we asked the community, what are your 3 favorite things about Bluffton? And we asked, what are the 3 most important things you would change or improve about Bluffton? So you can see here, these are sort of word clouds of the answers. The larger the word, the more often it was mentioned. So pretty interesting to sort of see the big words that have sort of popped up here. So Old Town, I think people, that sort of small town, that state of mind, sort of mentality is in there, as well as the May River and some of the natural beauty and historic features here. And then some of the things that people are maybe concerned about are traffic and development, and some of those things that clearly have been accelerating in the last several years, last decade or so. But just a few themes that sort of pop up here that we can sort of talk a little bit more tonight. We'd like to get a better understanding of, and what some of the priorities are as we start to look through some of these. So that sense of community, whether that's the old town or the small town feel, the sort of uniqueness and funkiness of Bluffton, the local restaurants and businesses, the aesthetics and landscape, the sort of friendliness of the people and the natural environment. All of these things are things we can build on. These are unique attributes to Bluffton. Its geographic location and the sort of history and culture and nature that's here. And so we want to make sure that this plan really brings these key, these uplifting takeaways into it. We want to make sure that those are inside of this plan. And then what are the 3 things you would change or improve about Bluffton? And this starts to get at some things that people maybe are a little concerned about. So the sort of pace of development and growth, increase in traffic, but paired with that, still yet a desire for more restaurants and business options and things to do. Some things are directly related to maybe a particular development or a particular project. So things like development standards and sort of a concern about the removal of trees or the need for greater roadway connectivity. I see some things already popping up here in the chat, and they certainly did in our stakeholder conversations about open space and parks and paths and trails being really important to folks, as well as preservation and natural features. And then, of course, affordable housing has come up an awful lot as well. So these are things that really help us gain that understanding. We had about 187 people answer that survey. We'll start to better understand that. And what we'd like to talk with you all tonight is, what are some things that are maybe missing from this list, or what are some things we ought to put a specific priority on? So really interested to get that feedback from you this evening. The other thing that we've had the chance to do in the last month or so is convene groups of stakeholders to do some roundtable discussions. What you see here on this slide are sort of those general groupings of Bluffton community members that we spoke with. So we met with about 85 people, and we talked through a lot of different types of topics and a very diverse group of people and perspectives. So we talked about land use and development and housing. We met with a group about education and job training and employment. How can we create a stronger workforce? Cultural resources, specifically, what are some of the history and preservation, arts and tourism and events, and how can those be better served? Transportation and mobility, talked about the plans around that and other things that are going on in the region. Environment and sustainability and resiliency. Specifically talked about parks and recreation. We met with representatives from a number of different neighborhoods, some of the plan unit developments, as well as Old Town. We met with a group on human services, and we met with elected officials from the Southern Lowcountry Council of Governments as well. So talk to the surrounding jurisdictions. And tomorrow, I think we are doing one more. We'll be meeting with a group of high school students tomorrow afternoon. So this is another step that we're taking to really gain a good understanding of what's happening in Bluffton. And we're excited to hear from you all this evening. And there's going to be a chance, I saw there's a question in Q&A for you all to continue to provide input. So if you missed the first survey, there will be another survey based on tonight's presentation that you'll be able to answer. So we'll go ahead maybe and copy this, if someone could, in the Q&A box. But it's bit.ly/Blueprint Bluffton, and it's also on the town's website. And we'll be using this website throughout the project. It has information on the existing comprehensive plan. It's got some information on the plan purpose. It'll have a link to a survey, and it'll have a link to all of the meeting materials from this evening. So you'll be able to really get a lot of information. You can find out who to contact if you have more questions. This is really going to be the home base for this project going forward. So please, keep an eye on that. And if you sign up for updates, we'll be able to let people know when things have been added to the website, so you all can keep track of the work and make sure that you're staying involved as we go ahead. So that will be where everything lands. All right, well, you all have done a great job of already asking some questions, and some of them, I think, hint toward some existing conditions. We've done just the sort of early stages of analysis here, and I think this maybe will help frame some conversation and maybe some further questions from you all this evening. We wanted to go through a few existing conditions pieces here, and I've seen questions about walkable, bikeable communities. I've seen some questions about different character. Seen a question about recreation, transportation. So all of these, I think we've got some initial information on, and judging by some of your interest here, we'll be able to expand upon that and do some additional analysis and bring back some findings to you all, knowing that these are priorities. But first and foremost, wanted to start off by just talking about the regional context of Bluffton. And while we're obviously concentrating on a comprehensive plan for the town of Bluffton, no city or town is an island, although we are close to many islands here. They all influence each other, right? And so we need to be aware of what's happening on Hilton Head. We need to be aware of what's happening in Savannah, at the port in Hardyville, with different types of development that are taking place, different focuses, different transportation needs, and all of these things influence or have a direct impact on Bluffton. And that is really why we started this process by convening a group of from the Southern Lowcountry Council of Governments and presenting to them to get an understanding of what was going on in the greater region. So building that greater understanding goes beyond the study area, and it's important to understand what the regional context is. The study area itself, shown in the areas here in orange, and this really gives you a sense of where our work will be taking place and where our focus is. Really evident here when you look at this to see how the town is shaped by the May River and this low country environment. And it really is very critical as we go through this to sort of turn a fresh eye to that and make sure that some of the resiliency and other things Chris will be talking about as we get into this are first and foremost. So this is really character and form giving, and it's also why Bluffton is a unique and special place, and it's why people want to be here. I think it's always good to start with what the existing land uses are, and here is where Bluffton is also interesting, and that is you see the area in orange are planned unit developments. And inside of those, there are a mixture of uses, primarily residential, but a mixture of other, commercial park, community uses inside of those. And so, that's very important to understand. And Chris, I don't know if you want to say a little more about that.
Yeah, sure. For those that you don't know, planned unit development, or PUD, sometimes people call it PUD, is a type of zoning, and so we're recognizing that as Bluffton grew, and it's not unusual for communities trying to really make sure that they guide development. Planned unit development zoning is often used because it's a negotiated type of zoning that really pushes developers to come in with much more detailed plans before they get zoning approval, talking about land uses, how they're going to lay out the development, where they're going to preserve the natural environment, where they're going to provide open space, and talk about the mix of uses. So as Bluffton grew, planned unit development was a preferred way of having new development happen. One of the drawbacks is that each one is often different and has its own requirements. I think that's one of the things the city is now, or the town is now dealing with, at this point in time. So we'll be talking more about planned unit development, but when you see that, that's really mostly residential, protected green space and parkland with a few other uses sprinkled in.
Yeah, and Kim, you'll see here a green space diagram, and it is something that, because it's in the PUD category, some of that doesn't read through. So that's some additional analysis that we'll do, and you'll see a map here in a second. The other thing it's worth looking at is then you sort of see the heart of Bluffton, which is Old Town, right? And you can see there just how dynamic that mix of uses are. That's where a lot of the town offices, you have civic and institutional uses there. You have a lot of residential mixed in with some commercial areas that sort of makes it unique and funky and interesting. There's some park spaces, that sort of dynamic mix of uses that is really, interesting. And it's what makes Bluffton unique. And so we do have a special focus on making sure the Old Town sort of retains those characteristics. There's a question here about donut holes on the map, and we'll go to that exactly next. So thanks for asking that. Those are areas of the county, right? So inside of our study area is county jurisdiction, and you can see some of those land uses as well. So primarily residential and a couple PUDs as well. This is where you start to see these commercial areas along 278 especially. And I think this is one of those things that is important to recognize, right? Those are the commercial areas that probably everyone visits and maybe doesn't realize is not Bluffton, right? So that's a very that's a part that generates a lot of traffic, and it probably is a place that all of you probably get to at some point during the week. We need to focus and understand those areas as well. So again, as we're starting to think about this work, what are the things that are happening that are in the center of Bluffton but maybe not part of the town, and how do these things work together?
So Andrew, just to reiterate, this is an important point. We all don't see the city and county boundary lines on the ground when we're moving around about our communities. So it's important to understand the areas you see colored here are not in the town of Bluffton, are not under the development authority of the town of Bluffton. So things that got developed there were developed under county regulations and county approvals. But obviously the town of Bluffton is surrounded in many cases, these areas. The property owners have not asked to be annexed into Bluffton, but that doesn't preclude that from happening at some point in the future.
So this is all of it together. So filling in that donut hole that one of you mentioned, we're really considering how all of these work together, and it's incredibly important as we look toward the future, and to understand how all of these areas work together, and some things that maybe need to be worked on. Parks, open space, and trails. So here's where we're starting to do some analysis. You see here a couple things. So conservation, preserve space in that lighter green, darker green, park space. And then you're starting to see in orange, you start to see the trail network, and then in a dotted line there, where future multi-use paths, trails are also planned. We do understand that while there has been some improvements in open space, and there's certainly some things in the works. It came up in a number of our stakeholder sessions, that there needs to be more open space and more park space. And so we want to understand that better. We'd love to get some feedback on that this evening. And so we'll be doing some additional analysis as well, trying to understand, I think as a planning goal, a lot of communities that we work for and in are looking to have a park or open space within a 10-minute walk of someone's front door. And so we'll do some analysis on that we'll bring back to the community and be able to show where some of those gaps are in the community. So we know that's incredibly incredibly important, and it's a focus going forward. It's just the quality of life. It's part of that quality of life piece that attract you to the place to begin with. There was a question here from one of you about why are all the pictures of Old Town, and so I think that's a really it's a good question. And I think the other part was how do we extend a sense of community throughout all of Bluffton? And that's really what we're trying to convey on this slide. So, Old Town maybe is seen by many as the heart of the community, but there's all these other hubs or nodes of activity that are starting to emerge or are emerging in Bluffton. And I think to one of your points here, I think it was Mike, how do we extend the sense of community throughout all of Bluffton? How do these other nodes that are developing and emerging have the characteristics of the place, have the architecture, have the feel, and not just, in a way that mimics it, but in a way that's truly authentic. And I realize that some of those things are already happening, and some of those we may have critique of. But I think as we look toward the future here, really important to better understand this and create some places where more community can develop in other places. And as the land area of the town has grown, I think that's even more important. We convened a group of young professionals that sort of said, hey, we can't afford to live close to Old Town. We're in other places. We're over at Buckwalter or New Riverside Village, and we'd like for more things to be happening over there as well. So as things evolve, we have to sort of change and create some other places for community gathering. And so we'll definitely focus on that, and would be interested to get your feedback on that this evening. So thank you for bringing that up.
And Andrew, I might just add, this is an important topic, not just in Bluffton, but we're seeing in a lot of communities that people want to be able to walk or bike with their families to, some of the basic services. And so this is something through the course of this plan we'd like to hear more about, and even tonight. How do we create some of those places? It's not designed to replicate Old Town. The point is, though, that and this is talking about different scales of kind of areas where we might have some services or some mix of uses, and they don't have to have the same feel. They could have the same feel. They can be different scales, but we're very interested in talking about, where those might be and what kind of things you'd like to see.
Yeah, and we may not have gotten all of them here on this initial map. So if there's some that we've missed, let us know. I think Sharon, maybe you've already done that here in your question. Some of you have mentioned traffic. Traffic is a key topic in any plan that we do, certainly. And we do have some other partners with us that are working, they'll be looking at the transportation network as well. This is just an early look at some of the major thoroughfares, major roadways in Bluffton, and the ones that sort of are handling the majority of the traffic. And so you can see 278, being that key corridor, and then how it breaks off across the community, whether that's May River Road or Bluffton Parkway, and then some of those north-south roads, how they start to handle things. We can start to see where some of these patterns exist, and where there might be some specific pinch points or places where different connections might be necessary. Really, I think as you look at good community development, having that multiplicity of connections, that redundancy of connections is important, so that that's sort of spread throughout the community, as opposed to concentrating it in a couple places. So there might be some opportunities to do that, to look at some different connections that might be missing, that could take a little bit of weight off the overall network. We'll be looking at that as well. And one of the things that we're starting to look at is sort of the inflow and outflow of people every day. And this is work at the data from the Census Bureau, and it's pre-COVID, so maybe some things have changed. But this starts to show you sort of what the sort of daily patterns are. And this is purely looking at employment patterns. So you have about 4,000 people that residents that work in Bluffton, that live in Bluffton. You have 7,800 people that work in Bluffton but live elsewhere. And then there are 12,000 Bluffton residents that work elsewhere. They're sort of heading out of the community on a daily basis. And these are important patterns to understand. We'll get a little more fine-grained in this as we go forward to see sort of exactly where people are headed, but you all probably know this. It's, Savannah, Beaufort, Hilton Head, sort of those major corridors that you start to see on that traffic map that I showed the slide previous. But begins to give us an understanding of what's going on in the community in terms of sort of daily migration patterns. And it's important for us to understand as we look toward the future. And again, we're looking out 10 years. So it's important to understand, what some of those trends are. And speaking of trends, I'll turn it over to Chris now to just sort of talk about the growth patterns that have happened here in Bluffton.
Yeah, so some of you that have lived here for the last 20 years will definitely appreciate this. Those of you that are more recent residents of the community will kind of see where how Bluffton has grown, particularly over the last 20 years. But this is showing the growth of the town of Bluffton. So this is the town boundaries in 1987. So you can see it really is Old Town. And then as we move forward from here, you can see there's a big leap between 1987 and 2000. So that 13-year period. There is growth north of Old Town, and this is annexation. So this is annexation into the town. This would be where landowners asked the town to become part of the town. And then you can also see the jump across the May River into the lowlands, the areas south of the May River, so low country. Excuse me, this is a substantial expansion. And then if you watch the chart at the bottom left, you can see the population change. Now, one of the important things to understand is just because land is annexed, it then has to go through the zoning, and it has to go through development approval, and you have to build services and roads and water and sewer and utilities, and then you have to build it, and then you have to build the homes, and then you have to sell it. And so there's a lag between when land is added to the town and when you see the population change. So here you can see there was a substantial almost doubling of the population between 1987 and 2000. But there's a lot more than doubling the land that's in the town, and that's reflected on the next map here, which shows now we're going from 2000 to 2005, so just a 5-year period. But you can see now by 2005, that previous development is now starting to get lived in. Residents are moving in, people are now working and living in there. So the population, jumped up to almost 5,000 people by 2005, and that's a 238% increase over the 5 years previous. And you can also now see the next round of annexation. So this is now moving to the north and northwest as we get up towards 278, as we move over towards 170 and the river boundaries. And this is where you can start seeing some of those, some of you talked about the donut holes, but there are areas that weren't annexed as part of this. Large areas were, but some areas were not. The landowners didn't request it, or the people that bought it didn't request it to be part of it. So this is the next big chunk of growth. And you can see on the next slide that as that got developed and people moved in, you can see the population jumped again from 5,000 to almost 12,000+. And so a large increase again followed that in population. And then annexation slowed down. You can see between 2005 and 2010, we're really filling in between the area north of Old Town and that annexation that happened after 2000 and getting up to the 278 frontage. So that was really a little bit slower annexation, but still a lot of growth and development occurring in the town. And then you can see now from 2010 to 2015, even smaller amount of annexation. We're just kind of filling in the edges as properties, landowners asked to be annexed. But again, the population is moving into the areas that were annexed previously and are now finally being developed. And so again, you can see that population. So part of what I'm trying to tell you is annexation happens, there's a lag, but you see then the population corresponding growth that happens, 3-5 years later. So here's where we are today. And again, we've already talked about, there's those areas within the study area that are not in the town of Bluffton, where we are interested in people that live there and what the future of those areas are. We're also very interested, obviously, in all that is in the town of Bluffton and areas that might become part of the town of Bluffton. But I think the key takeaway is, and you all know this, there's really been explosive growth in the community over the last 20 years. The population has gone from 1,000 to now we're closing in on 25,000 people. But the other thing that's important to realize as well, I'm sure that's been a bit of a head spinning kind of impact on things from schools and just services that need to be provided. You can see that we're starting to hit those study area limits. It's not going to continue to be explosive annexation forever. And as we kind of slow down, you saw the last 5 years worth of annexation. A lot of the focus needs to be on what do we have, what's within the town today, how do we make it better for all of you, what are the issues we're facing. We need to focus on our community now that we've had all this development and try to improve it, make it better, and maybe adjust things that didn't quite work as well and focus on them. So I think that's part of the message that we wanted to share with you today. So again, 1980, it was Old Town, you were 1 square mile, and today you are now 54 square miles and you're a town of almost 25,000 people.
Great, thanks, Chris. That's the end of our presentation here this evening. We want to now have some discussion. So I'm going to go back through a few questions. Some of them have been answered, some of them have not, just to put a finer point on a few things. And if you continue to have questions, please go ahead and ask them, and we'll do our best to answer all of them this evening. I think one of the questions really started to revolve around the study area and the parts that are the town and the parts that are the county. Someone said here that may not be Bluffton citizens, but that's your mailing address. You live here, you spend money here, you go to school, you use services. So definitely we value that input. Definitely not discounting it. You're definitely a part of the overall larger community. So thank you for attending, and please continue to take part in this. Also see Beaufort County Bike Ped Task Force Plan. Yes, we're going through all the plans. We'll make sure to take a look at that one as well. If it's not already on our list, certainly want to look at those overall recommendations to make sure that we're picking up everything. Let's see. I think maybe we've gotten to most of the other questions. Chris, I don't know if you see any that you wanted to address.
I think we've been trying to answer it. This has been a good discussion. We want to keep talking here. Just want to make sure that you all know that this is kind of the opening discussion, and we're going to be putting together a lot more material, a lot more detailed information on kind of what we see, what we hear from all of you, and try to advance some of these things that come up tonight and that have come up in our stakeholder discussions. And then when I went over that list, there's those state requirements and there's priorities for the town of Bluffton. Those are going to be really focus areas. Some of you asked about recreation. Recreation is a fundamental part of this plan. It's one of the things we're hearing. People really want to have a connected community with trails, want to have obviously the recreational opportunities, park opportunities for everyone living here. Transportation, obviously critical with all that growth and annexation, but obviously taxes the transportation system. So we've got to worry about that. But also mobility in general, just how do people get around from sidewalks and biking as well as driving, and what those alternatives are becomes also very important today. And so how do we address those things? And housing, you saw, was really important. Land use, we'll be working on a future land use map. And then how do we continue to improve and match the authenticity of Old Town, but also are there other areas, as we're talking about this kind of centers of activity, that makes sense to add to the community to help, as it's grown so much, help kind of create neighborhood centers. And so those are some other areas. I think those touched on some of the big points.
Yeah, and there's a few more questions that have sort of popped up here. I want to make sure that we get to. clearly see some question here from Tom about growth and the school system. We definitely sat down with county schools and had a conversation about a month ago to understand what their plans are and where they are in terms of enrollment and where they're starting to see issues pop up. So we have a good understanding of that. Certainly, they have some plans that I'm sure they're working on, but we have gotten at least a baseline understanding of what the needs are there, and make sure that we consider that going forward. Debbie, you've got a question here about bacteria levels and declining salinity in the May River. That is something that we'll be looking at as part of our resiliency report.
Yeah.
That we actually have a sub-consultant that will be specifically focusing on that. So that is that's important that we need to understand that, and we'll be looking at, there is some sort of reporting out there on water quality and some of the work that's being done there. So again, we'll look to integrate some of the existing studies that have been developed to this point. Mike, you also had a question here about hospitality and tourism versus attracting primary employers. That was a key focus of another one of our stakeholder sessions, meeting with those that are working to attract jobs and employers to the area, not just Bluffton, but the region. So part of that is in those attraction efforts that would create a more diversified economy, but it also trickles into the education system, things that maybe the school systems are working on, but also the community college and other job training. So again, we've talked with them about that, and we've gotten a sense of what some efforts are there as well. So I think that point is also really well taken.
I think one of the things, there was a question about all the growth that you just saw and you're experiencing. And I think one of the things we will do as part of this plan is, within that study area, what under the current conditions, including the undeveloped areas, but also the areas that need to be protected, what roughly would be kind of the build out population and condition. And we'll look at that. We'll have those discussions. But I do want to emphasize, because there is a boundary, this isn't growth that will never end. There is a kind of an end to it. But I think what this plan needs to do is talk about how do we guide the growth that hasn't occurred yet. What type is it? What are the types of development that are missing? And it gets back to things like balancing the land uses and the jobs and affordable housing and those kind of things, and where do those go, and how do we improve the community? So these are all really important discussions, and we look forward to continue to having them with you.
I think we have a live question we'd like to ask and have you type into the Q&A box. But I think you all are starting to hint toward a few of the things that maybe you see as priorities. But it would be helpful for everyone that's in attendance, I think, to go ahead here and give us all an answer to this question in the Q&A box. As we're going through this, it'd be incredibly helpful. So what should be the priorities of this plan going forward? What should we focus our efforts on? There's a couple things that are incredibly important to you all here this evening. I think you've started to tell us a few of those things. If you can go ahead and share those right now, that would be great. And we maybe talk about that a little bit here as we begin to take some live Q&A as well. So you go ahead and start typing those in. I think we do have a few hands up already. So if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. We will allow you to unmute and ask your question. Please do your best to keep your question to about a minute or so. And we will we'll have some conversation here. So I do see a few hands up, and I'll go ahead, and I think, Ed, your hand's been up here for a while. So thank you for your patience, and I'll go ahead and unmute you here and let you ask your question. And then after that, I think we'll go to Denise. So Ed, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you can and ask a question.
Am I unmuted?
You are live. Thank you, Ed.
Well, it seems like early on, everybody talked about walkable, bikeable community, especially in the old town, which it is pretty much already. It could also be improved, but I'm concerned about these satellite community centers. I'm not familiar with the place type assembly term, but I assume those are satellite community centers in a sense. And I had to disagree with Kevin that says that Buckwalter is a walkable, bikeable community center, because I don't think it is at all. And it frightens me to think that we're going to have a series more of Buckwalter centers, type centers. And in the long run, I think we're going to have to face up to some multi-level parking somewhere, even in the old town. And there are good ways to do that, and there are bad ways to do it. And of course, you try to hide it, and you try to disguise it, and you try to think it's not there, but it's already needed. Many, many times you can go downtown in Bluffton, and you cannot find a parking place within 3 blocks of where you want to go. So there are problems.
Yeah, those are great comments. I think we want to hear, it sounds like you're in support, or at least interested in hearing more about kind of these additional activity centers. I forget the word you use, but basically the assembly, that's kind of jargon for creating walkable, the kit of parts you need to create a walkable place. And so you're touching on that. Surface parking lots is obviously catering to vehicles, and you have to be careful if you're trying to create a walkable area, how you design the vehicular entries and where you put parking. And to your point, one of the reasons you see communities doing things like parking decks is to concentrate parking and allow more development that's walkable. Because what happens really is parking lots and cars interrupt that walkability. And so when you have a bunch of parking lots out in front of development, it's great if we're all driving to it, and there's appropriate places for that. But if you're trying to create a more walkable neighborhood node, you want to do a little bit more of kind of screening or hiding or concentrating the parking and having the buildings that really are address the pedestrian environment, the multi-use trails, have outdoor seating, and you really don't want parking lots right there or lots of traffic. So you get a little creative, but there's a lot of different models out there on how you do that kind of development.
And I think, one of the things that, Ed, your point about walkability in some of these newer centers that have popped up, there might be a couple places in there where some of the architecture is reminiscent of the place, but also I think we have to think about the scale, right? The tightness of the space, the sort of sense that you're in, sort of enclosed a little bit, right? And so some of these new things that are, wide open spaces that are now becoming developed, or they used to have trees on them and those have been taken away. Some of those things that give character, sort of hard to create from scratch. And sometimes it's the width of the street itself, that we need to maybe think about and be a little more creative about how to create that feeling that might be lacking there, in addition to looking at those uses. Let's see, it looks like we've got another question here from Joe. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. We talk a lot about the central places, Buckwalter Place and things like that. We haven't talked much about the parkways themselves, which are really well set up, nice parkways, and yet the development along them has seemed to not really have a plan. They don't themselves really seem to have a sense of place as you travel along them. I think part of that is because the town is really only involved at the site level as part of the review. It's up to the PUD to review the architecture and the building, and kind of the rest of the pieces of the project to really make it part of a whole. The town gets really involved in Old Town and the historic district with some really tight reviews, and there's some areas that are highway corridor overlay that get reviewed, but there's a lot of big holes along the parkways. I think it's led to a lot of storage buildings being built. Buckwalter Place, they talk about the realigning the parkways together out there, and already one of the anchor corners is a 3-story storage building. Is there any thought in developing this plan in doing something like Hilton Head does, where they kind of review anything within 500 feet of a major arterial and a waterway, and having the town get more involved in kind of these major arteries within our neighborhood?
So, Joe, that's a great point. I think some of the other things like the tree cutting and landscaping would tie all that together. This is the whole reason we're doing this. We want to hear town wants to hear these kinds of comments from you all. They want to know what's important to you and what you think the concerns are. So it's great to hear all of you express these kinds of things. Things like, guiding the development that happens along a corridor, things like setbacks, things like landscaping, things like tree preservation really get reflected in the zoning code. But if we hear these coming up as key issues that we want to advance, then we can work on making recommendations, and we will make recommendations to the town on, here's areas we heard of concern, here's kind of best practice ways of addressing them. So that's a great point. So this is perfect kind of stuff we want to hear from all of you, because we in the town need to hear that these are concerns and these are things you'd like to see done. Andrew, do you want to add any of that?
No, but I think there are certainly some comments that have sort of popped up in the Q&A that sort of add to that. So sort of see some support of looking at parking a little more creatively from Johnny, a point that Ed made. Ed sort of saying, hey, let's make sure we're not doing all this strip commercial, a point that's sort of echoed by a few other people as well. So I want to make sure that we'll let you know we understand that. And also see comment here from Queen that really we need to be thinking about the environmental protection and sustainability of the May River. I want to make sure that that you understand that we really are going to look at that. It is a place where the native Gullah Geechee are I'm going to make sure they're able to stay in Bluffton and make sure these cultural resources are a priority. So thank you for making sure that's brought up and on the table here tonight as well. Really important point as we look ahead and ensure that the legacy residents of this place are able to still be here. So it's also really important. It looks like we've got another live question here from Sharon. I'll ask you to unmute and go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, Sharon, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. And thank you guys so much for putting this on. I'm not sure how many people were able to get on, especially for African Americans. But my question, well, where should the focus be? We need to somehow preserve more acreage for green space in each of these communities. We have all these homes coming up, and families are within these neighborhoods that are being built. Yes, they may have a community center or something else, but we really need to focus on preserving green space so that we can have parks in each community. And somehow, some way that needs to be one of the priorities, as well as affordable housing, not only for the people who work here, but for the people who live there. There are so many restrictions on what people can put on their land and these guidelines and all these things that they have to meet. It's no way that they can get a feasible home because they're handcuffed. So we got to do better. You know, the old town is good, you know, they got their walking space, they got all kind of amenities that really does not cater to the low income, middle income families. You can't afford it. So when we say all, this is a great platform, but when we say all, we cannot forget about the people who were first here. And that's being just faded out, which is so sad because developers come in and they forget about the people that were already here, however they lost their land or whatever they did. We have to get back to the old town mentality. If we say that the state of mind and the vision and the mission that was first posted up there, where is it? Because I don't see it. So thank you so much for your time.
Hey, Sharon, before you go, talk to me a little bit more about, you said the green spaces for each neighborhood and parks. Do you have an idea of kind of what key components would be in those parks for each neighborhood? I mean, if you don't, that's fine. But
oh, absolutely, I do. So when I say green space, you want to have a park area for kids that can come and run around. You know, our kids are at a computer all day long, and all they do is they text, they finger play games. So we need an open space for them to be able to enjoy the outdoors where families can come and grill out. You know, you'll never get back to the old way, but half of the people that live here, we don't even know them. And it's not that we shouldn't. We should. So we need to have meeting areas that we can meet people, parks, running swing sets, you know, those kind of activities where I can throw a frisbee and let my dog run and jump and grab the frisbees, those kind of things. And also be able to grill out on a Saturday or a Sunday. That's the kind of green space that I'm referring to.
That sounds great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, I think a lot of what you said is tremendously important. The affordable housing has come up an awful lot in our conversations as well. You brought that up, Sharon. Really important, and that's something that we understand is being looked at on a regional level. So some of these things, the town will be able to influence, but the cooperation across the region on some of these issues, especially some of the environmental ones, are also really important. I know there's some movement afoot on both fronts, both environmental protection and as it relates to affordable workforce attainable housing as well. So we'll make sure that those conversations are brought in to this work. Mike, it looks like you've got a question. I'll go ahead and let you unmute here and ask.
Am I on?
You are. We've got you.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Just a couple things here on my mind. It seems that Bluffton creates some of its own problems by focusing so much of its efforts on hospitality and tourism, travel, restaurants, food and beverage, all those things that create jobs that don't pay very well. All those kinds of industries that attract people from outside and create a lot of traffic nightmares. What we should be looking for are primary employers, companies that can come here and pay really good jobs. Our affordable housing problem could be solved just that way. Some of our traffic problem could be solved that way if we stop thinking of ourselves as a bedroom community for Hilton Head and trying to attract all these millions of people from outside into our little town. So how do we do that?
So Mike, that's great. That's exactly, really, you're hitting on the point of this plan today is, Bluffton grew up and it was very much hospitality entertainment centered because of where you're located and the attraction, national attraction that this area is. But now I think you're right. You're seeing that we need to rebalance. We need to talk about things like employment. You saw that chart that Andrew showed, the amount of people driving in to work in Bluffton, the amount of people driving out of Bluffton to work elsewhere. So thinking about how do we do, one of those things is economic development and job creation. And you're right, not just any jobs, but some certain kinds of jobs that probably are underrepresented in the town of Bluffton. But it does mean we need to think about where those go and how do you create an environment that is attractive to those types of businesses. And we'll definitely be talking about that. But that we'd like to hear that, so we know that's what you're thinking, and that matches, I think, some of the things we've heard.
Great, thank you, Mike.
And I should add, Andrew, I should add, we're saying these things, this is early. If you're not satisfied with our answers, I think the key point is keep on us as we go through this process across this year, and look for what we come up with together with you, and want to hear your input and make sure we're addressing these issues that you're raising today.
Great. Yeah, let us know if there's any other live questions. We've got a few more minutes here. If anybody has anything they'd like to bring up. Definitely seeing a few more things sort of coming in. Being a connected community, building, I think, Sharon, on your point that people need gathering places to get to know each other. I think that's really important. And that needs to look at all of Bluffton and how it interacts with the rest of the region. And go beyond just Old Town, right? So how do you extend that way of life, that state of mind into other parts of the community? We'll certainly be looking at a couple of folks have mentioned preservation of natural and cultural environments. I think we've talked about that a little bit tonight. And how do we look at things that are maybe in the practice of some different sort of development standards or planning regulations we need to look at and understand how current practices might be harming wetlands, wildlife habitats, neighborhoods. I think there's another question here about connections because this stuff has happened a little bit at a time, right? We see this in a lot of places we work, but some of the connections between parts of the community aren't as good as they should be. So again, we'll be doing some analysis there. So thank you for pointing us to that. If there are any other questions, please go ahead and pop them in. But I think we have gotten to most of them tonight. And you all have been a really great and engaged audience.
I saw one, I'm trying to scroll through here. I saw one that I don't think we answered about annexation. I'm going to tell you my understanding, but if Kevin or Charlotte want to add, yeah, typically almost always annexation is at the request of the property owner. Most states, and I'm trying to remember how South Carolina's law is written, allow towns to annex, but it is a very convoluted process that makes it really tough to do and usually requires votes and other things that are and just politically hard to do. So almost always annexation is owner initiated, meaning the person that owns the property requests annexation to the community.
Great, thanks, Chris. Well, we really appreciate your time today and for really being very forthright and honest with us and bringing up some important issues for us to understand. And as Chris mentioned, we really look forward to continuing the conversation after this evening, and again, hopefully seeing you here in person in the very near future. Our next steps, just to give you sort of a sense of the overall schedule here, we are really in task one, doing our research review and background. We've started our community outreach. This is really our first step in that work. And then we're doing our needs assessment. So this work that you're pointing us toward, your comments here are helping us think a little bit about the needs assessment and where we might need to focus our time and attention. And we'll bring this back to you all for your further thoughts and input at sort of end of summer, early fall. We'll have had a chance to sort of go through all the input we've received and go through the conversations we've had and go through the assessments that we've done and bring that back to you all for your thoughts and input. In the meantime, we do have one more of these. It's the same presentation, same discussion. If there's anyone you know that wasn't able to make it tonight, please let them know that at 8 a.m. tomorrow we'll be doing this again. Short turnaround for us, but we love having these conversations. So we'll be doing one more of these. You can find information again on the Blueprint Bluffton website, on the town town's website following the address that's on the screen right now. Please share this project website and the survey with friends and neighbors. It's a way that you can interact with us throughout the coming weeks following tonight's presentation. There will be a copy of the presentation, a recording of the presentation, and we'll also have a survey that you can use to continue to provide input to us. So this will be a very transparent process. We will report back out what we've heard from everyone. We've taken in, looks like at least 50 questions from you all this evening. That is super, super important for us to look through and understand. Looks like we have one last question. So we'll go ahead and Ed, you have another question here. We'll let you ask it here. And Ed? And if you're able to unmute, I think we're able to take your question.
Are minutes of these meetings available?
So there'll be a recording of this available on the website. Yeah, so we can put a recording of this on the website and a list of the commonly asked questions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Good question. Thank you for that.
And we're going to be taking all this input and consolidating it. And there's a lot of common themes here, which is great. And we really appreciate all your answers and thoughts on this. This is very helpful. So yeah, we'll have a consolidated summary of this that will be available probably after we have the next several meetings. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your time and attention and feedback this evening. We look forward to talking with all of you in person soon. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week and we'll talk with you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.